Raheem Morris has been hired as the head coach of the Atlanta Falcons. This one is interesting on a number of levels. Number one, a lot of people hate this hiring. So what are your thoughts on the Raheem Morris to Atlanta job?
Yeah, I mean, I guess when you're positioned against Bill Belichick, I understand why some people might be frustrated by it. I think it's a good hire. I think Morris has shown an ability to adapt to different schemes. Did not run kind of what Brandon Staley was running in LA when he first got there in 2021, and did, based on accounts from Jalen Ramsey and a bunch of other players, more adapt to them than make them adapt to him.
Right.
This past year, I mean, look, Kobe Turner is on the top 5 list for defensive rookies of the year, deservedly so. Byron Young, the underlying metrics aren't as strong, but was top 5 in sacks among rookies as well. You know, Jacoby Durant and all these young players that have played very well for Raheem Morris. My thing is, some people I've seen comment on with the Bucs tenure, the takeaway should be that he got a head coaching job at 33. He inherited like a kind of older, bloated roster that needed to be torn down. The guy went 10-6 with Josh Freeman at quarterback, and they didn't make the playoffs that year, which is a whole different conversation. But Josh Freeman, I think, played one more year in the NFL after that and has not played a down since. So I think he's clearly a very good coach. You had Thomas Dimitroff come out and say stuff about him. There's the video of Les Snead going around from the Rams talking about him. There's a Mike Tomlin clip saying he's the best coach he's ever been around. Like, clearly you have to listen at some time. You know, I'm not always an appeal to authority guy. We get some of this messaging, but I think it's very, very clear that he's a very good football coach. I know it's also kind of funny he was interim there like 2-3 years ago. But, you know, by all accounts, this looks like a good hire, and you saw it on the field in LA. They did not have talent, and the defense was good enough to get to the playoffs.
And he's the guy that often gets forgotten about as being, you know, the coach in that Shanahan tree that's in the room with those Washington coaches back in 2013. You know, the graphic of all of them. He's the guy that always gets overlooked. And yet, when you listen to that Jordan Rodriguez series, the play callers, when it was talking about all those Shanahan coaches, they all talked up Raheem Morris as, you know, being a guy and being a smart coach and being a really intriguing mind. And I also think, okay, as far as I'm aware, they haven't named an offensive coordinator there yet. But from what I understand, the reports are that Zach Robinson, PFF Zach, is one of the front runners to go with him to be part of that head coaching thing. So if Raheem Morris is bringing his defensive acumen to the table, Zach Robinson is bringing the Sean McVay, Shanahan coaching tree offensive acumen to the table. The two of them combined, I mean, that does feel like a really intriguing option if they can find a quarterback. I mean, this was the same thing the big holdup with the Bill Belichick thing potentially is, where's my quarterback coming from? So if they can get Zach Robinson, if it ends up being him being a quarterback, now you've got Bijan Robinson, a good offensive line, Kyle Pitts, Drake London. You've got weapons, and we have a good defensive coach. Let's go.
Also, my favorite thing, it's purely anecdotal, but he was the receivers coach in Atlanta for 3 years. So he's coached on both sides of the football, which I just fall in love with every time. It's a massive signal for me that you must be sharp if you've coached on offense and defense. Whether or not that's true is a conversation for a different day. But yeah, you know, I think the thing there when you're talking about too, maybe they made a decision of, we're not going to try to like rush back into this. Arthur Blank has had a lot of messaging about kind of chasing the end of the Matt Ryan era, how difficult it made the situation with all the dead cap. They still have the record for the biggest dead cap hit of all time for a single player at $40 million. Although that'll be doubled this offseason by Denver. But yeah, so it's more of, okay, we're actually going to be patient. I think number 8 for the draft at quarterback becomes maybe more likely. Do they trade up to 3 with New England if they don't fall in love with Drake May or Jaden Daniels or whoever is there? I just think it's, instead of like, yeah, let's get Kirk Cousins, let's chase this thing right now, it becomes, let's build this thing out. We have good talent, like you just talked about, a lot of young players on both sides of the football. Let's build a consistent, sustained winner, not, chase a ring in the 3 years that Bill Belichick wants to coach our team.
And that's the other element of this is the joke that we were making for a while that Atlanta would blow a 28-3 lead with Bill Belichick happened to come to pass. They didn't get the Bill Belichick thing over the line. All the reports were that they wanted it to happen. Arthur Blank in particular liked the idea of Bill Belichick being the coach, but they couldn't come to an agreement on what it was going to look like. And it kind of sounds like it was the organizational part of it that was going to be the problem, right? Again, one of the challenges, I guess, of hiring Bill Belichick as your head coach now is, do you give him the keys to the franchise? Do you give him lock, stock, and barrel, exactly what he had in New England, total and complete control, regardless of what the structure had been at your franchise before that, knowing that it might only be that way for a couple of years? Like, can you even do that? Can you turn a franchise over to one guy for like 3 years and not have a structure in place that makes sense once he's gone? So I guess where I'm going with this is, there's now one job available still at this point?
Two, Washington and Seattle.
Washington having reportedly sort of zeroed in on their candidate, and that one might not actually be available at the moment. But we're running out of chairs for Bill Belichick to sit in by the time the season rolls around. Are we now entering a world where, because it sounds like he wants to get that Don Shula record, right? So he needs 15 more wins, which is probably 2 seasons worth, at least, depending on where he goes. Is he going to have to do the Sean Payton thing? Are we going to see Belichick on Fox for a year before the next coaching cycle and he gets a chance? Or how is this thing going to go?
I think so. At this point, like Seattle, why would you move on from Pete Carroll and then hire another guy who's the same age, right? Like, again, not that that's like, a 1-to-1 comparison, but it would be a little bit strange to go that route. And yeah, so I think he takes a year off, something else comes open. Maybe he builds out his cachet of, look, there are 2 things that I think are prevalent in this coaching cycle that have been building, but more and more. The first being, like you just talked about, how much control, how much power does the head coach get? The messaging out of Tennessee, for example, has been very strong that they want the personnel people to run personnel and the coach to work with them, not the coach to have those guys work for them. Bill Belichick, I'm sure, and he deserves to ask for it. I get it. And look, Jim Harbaugh just won that power struggle in L.A. He is going to have 3-man roster control, I'm sure. I don't know that for a fact, but it looks that way, which the Chargers have never done. But anyway, the second piece is we hear these interviews how they ask them so often, who is your staff going to be around you? And in particular for defensive coaches. There was a quote from, I think it was Ben Albright, who said that Raheem Morris got asked not only who's your OC going to be, but if PFF Zach Robinson gets hired away, who's your next OC going to be? Like, it was that level. And, I mean, Bill Belichick probably says, yeah, there's this guy, Josh McDaniels, that, players mutinize against 15 games into every season. He'll be my first OC. After that, I'll hire, I don't know, Matt Patricia or Joe Judge. And that's not appealing, right? So I think those are the 2 big pieces there. Take a year off, rebuild, restock the holster. Or if not, look, go to Vanderbilt where your dad coached. No one's against that I've talked to. No one's against him just going to coach the Vanderbilt Commodores.
But you're also it is interesting. You now need to almost have a succession plan in place for offensive coaches because we're in a world where, there was that stat that every single team in the NFL has changed their offensive coordinator since the 2022 offseason. So like 2 cycles, the entire league has flipped, has turned over their offensive coordinator for various reasons, whether they've been hired away, they've been fired because they haven't been good enough, whatever. Every single team over 2 years has changed their offensive coordinator. So if you're hiring a guy, for example, on a 6-year contract, unless you're the brains of the operation on offense, like unless you are, Kyle Shanahan, you're like, I'm bringing my system, doesn't matter who my OC is, it's me every year. If you're not that, you need to know not just who the guy is, but who's the next guy. When he gets hired away, who are you giving the keys to? Because you're not doing it. So I think, it's a smart thing, I think, for teams to recognize that trend and want answers to those questions. I don't know how realistic it is that you'll get a good one at this point, like in the process. I think part of that is you figure out over the course of the year or 2 before the guy gets poached away who his replacement can be if you have one in house. But it's definitely the way the league is going right now.